I don't want a wife. Send her back. Nathan Walker said those words to his own father, face hard, voice flat, no room for argument. Outside, a woman had just stepped off the train with tears still drying on her cheeks and a single worn suitcase in both hands, having traveled 2,000 miles for a man who had already decided she wasn't welcome. He had buried his heart 3 years ago alongside Clara, and nobody, not his father, not loneliness, not God himself, was going to dig it back up. He was certain of that. He was wrong. Before we go any further, if this kind of story stops you cold, please subscribe to our channel, drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from, and follow this story all the way to the end. We want to see exactly how far this journey travels. The words had already left his mouth before Nathan Walker fully registered what he was looking at. A woman, young, 20-something maybe, carrying a single suitcase that had seen better decades, wearing a dress that had been pressed carefully at some point during a very long journey and had lost that careful pressing somewhere around the Kansas border. Her eyes were red, not the soft red of someone who had cried politely. The deep, swollen red of someone who had been crying since before sunrise and had not decided to stop yet. She did not flinch when he said it. That was the first thing that surprised him. He had expected flinching. He had expected a trembling lip, the backward step, the immediate apology. He had spoken those 4 words, "Get off my land," to enough people over the past 3 years that he knew how they landed. They landed hard, they were designed to. But this woman simply stood there and looked at him. Not with anger, not with fear, with something that unsettled him far more than either of those things. She looked at him, like she was trying to figure out if he was worth saving. Nathan Walker was 36 years old, and had spent the last 3 of those years making absolutely certain that no one on earth would look at him that way again. He had gotten very good at it. The beard helped, the silence helped more. The reputation helped most of all. In the valley towns scattered across the Montana Territory in the summer of 1886, there were 2 kinds of stories people told about Nathan Walker. The first kind was told by people who remembered him. From before the accident, before the grief, before the man who used to laugh too loud at county dances became someone who no longer attended anything at all. Those people told stories about the best horseman in 3 counties, the man who could read weather in the color of a cloud, the rancher whose cattle operation had once been the pride of everything within riding distance of the Yellowstone. The second kind of story was told by everyone else, and everyone else had a much simpler version. Broken, they said. Finished. A man who had let grief hollow him out so completely that there was nothing left inside worth the trouble of knowing. Nathan had decided, somewhere around the end of that first terrible winter after Clara died, that the second version of the story was more useful. A man people pitied from a distance was a man people left alone. And being left alone was the only thing Nathan Walker wanted from the world anymore. Which was why the letter had enraged him. He had not found it himself. His father, Thomas, had left it on the kitchen table with the careful, deliberate casualness of a man who had been rehearsing the placement for several days. A plain envelope, a St. Louis postmark, his name written on the outside in handwriting that was neat without being fussy, steady without being cold. Nathan had stared at it for a long moment before he picked it up. "I didn't ask for this," he said. Thomas was already at the stove, back turned, doing something with a coffee pot that did not require nearly as much attention as he was giving it. "No," the old man agreed. "You didn't. You placed an advertisement." "I did, without telling me. If I'd told you, you'd have said no." "I'm saying no now." Thomas set the coffee pot down. Turned around. He was 60 years old and had the hands of a man who had worked cattle his entire life, which meant they were not pretty hands, but they were honest ones. He looked at his son with the kind of patience that only comes from watching someone you love destroy themselves slowly over a period of years. "Read it first," Thomas said, "then say no." Nathan almost didn't. He held the envelope for another long moment, the weight of it light in his palm, almost insulting in its lightness, as if something this small had no business changing anything. Then he opened it. The letter was not what he expected. He had expected declarations, romantic language, some catalog of a woman's virtues designed to make herself sound appealing to a lonely man. He had read enough of those kinds of letters, passed around at the general store, by men who found them amusing, to know the format. This was not that, Mr. Walker. I am not going to tell you that I am beautiful or accomplished, or that I will make you happy. I don't know if any of those things are true in the way that matters to you. What I can tell you is this. I am 26 years old. I have worked since I was 14. I know how to manage a household and keep accounts, and I am not afraid of hard things. I lost my father 8 months ago. The debts he left behind took everything else. I am not looking for rescue. I am looking for a fair arrangement, a place where my work means something, where I am treated with respect, and where I can build something that belongs to me. If that is something you can offer honestly, I will come. If it is not, please don't write back. I would rather know now than discover it later. Eliza Harper. Nathan read it twice. Then he folded it, put it back in the envelope, and set it on the table. She sounds practical, he said. She sounds honest, Thomas said. Same thing, not always. Nathan stood at the table for another moment. Outside, the early morning light was doing something complicated with the hills to the east, the kind of thing Clara used to make him stop and look at. He didn't look at it anymore. I'll meet her, he said finally. I'll explain the situation in person. It's the decent thing to do. Thomas said nothing. Don't look at me like that. I'm not looking at you like anything. You're hoping. The old man picked up his coffee. A man my age is entitled to hope for things, he said. Doesn't mean anything is guaranteed. 3 weeks later, Nathan Walker stood at the train platform in the small town of Millhaven, Montana, and watched the eastbound train pull in with the particular grinding complaint of machinery that had traveled too far without rest. He had his speech prepared. It was a good speech. He had worked on it. Not the words exactly. Nathan Walker had never been a man who worked on words, but the logic of it, the structure. He would tell her the truth directly. He would tell her that his father had acted without his consent. He would tell her that the farm was struggling but stable, that she would receive money for her return journey, that he was sorry for the inconvenience, and that he genuinely hoped she found what she was looking for somewhere else. He would be honest. He would be kind. And then he would go home alone, which was exactly what he wanted. He almost didn't see her right away. The platform was busy that afternoon. A supply shipment had come in on the same train, and there were men moving crates, families waiting for relatives, the general organized chaos of a delivery day. He was scanning for a woman traveling alone when he caught the sound of raised voices near the far end of the platform. Not a fight exactly. More the sound of a man talking too loudly because he enjoyed the sound of himself doing it. Richard Cole. Nathan's jaw tightened involuntarily. Richard Cole was 50 years old, the wealthiest ranch owner in Millhaven County, and a man who had never once in Nathan's memory done anything that didn't serve Richard Cole's interests first and exclusively. He was standing near the edge of the platform crowd with 2 of his ranch hands flanking him, and he was talking loudly enough that the people around him had taken a half step back to give him room. Mail order bride, Cole was saying. The words carrying the particular amused contempt of a man who had never needed to arrange anything in his life that money couldn't simply purchase outright. That's what Walker's come to, is it? A mail order bride. He shook his head with theatrical sadness. Man can't even find a woman willing to have him the normal way. Has to send east for one who doesn't know any better yet. His hands laughed. Around them people had the uncomfortable look of people who wanted to disappear but couldn't figure out where to go. Nathan was already moving toward Cole when he saw her. She was standing about 10 feet from the group, holding that suitcase in both hands. And she had clearly heard every word, because she was looking directly at Richard Cole with an expression that Nathan could not immediately categorize. It wasn't tears. He would have expected tears. It wasn't rage. He would have understood rage. It was something quieter than both of those things, and somehow more dangerous. She took 2 steps toward Richard Cole. Cole noticed her and smiled the smile of a man who thought he was about to be entertaining. "And here she is," he said, "the brave pioneer woman, come all this way to marry a man who—" "I heard what you said." Her voice was clear, not loud. Just absolutely clear, the way a bell is clear, not because of volume, but because of the particular quality of the sound. Cole blinked. "Well, now, I was just—" "You were saying," Eliza Harper said, "that a woman who doesn't know better is the only kind who would agree to come here." She looked at him steadily. "I know quite a lot, Mr. Cole. Richard Cole." He said it like it was supposed to mean something. "Mr. Cole." She nodded. "I know that the journey from St. Louis takes 4 days by train and 2 more by stage if the road is passable. I know what the weather does here in winter because I read every account I could find before I agreed to come. I know that ranch work is harder than most men give it credit for, which is why most of them hire women to do the parts of it they'd rather not think about." She paused. "I didn't travel this far because I didn't know what I was getting into. I came because I did know, and I chose it anyway." The platform had gone noticeably quiet. Richard Cole opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again and said something about having business to attend to, and moved away with his men trailing after him. And the quiet that remained was the particular quiet of people who have just watched something unexpected happen and are still adjusting to it. Nathan Walker stood at the edge of it all and felt the speech he had prepared dissolve somewhere in the back of his mind. He walked over to her. She turned to look at him, and he saw her clearly for the first time. The red eyes, the steadiness underneath the redness. The way she was holding that suitcase like she had been holding it for a very long time, and had no intention of putting it down until she knew exactly where she was going to set it. "Mr. Walker," she said. "Miss Harper." A pause. "I'm guessing," she said carefully, "that didn't go the way you planned." Nathan looked at her for a moment. "No," he said, "it didn't." She nodded once, like she was filing that information somewhere useful. "Well," she said, "should we start over?" The ride back to the ranch took an hour and a half, and Nathan spent most of it trying to find the right moment to deliver the speech that had, in its original form, already been delivered and thoroughly collapsed before the journey even began. He told himself he was waiting for a natural pause in the conversation. The problem was that Eliza Harper asked questions. Not intrusive questions, not romantic questions, practical ones. She asked about the elevation of the land and whether the water source ran year-round. She asked about the size of the herd and how many hands he was currently employing. She asked about the nearest town and how often the supply wagons ran. Nathan answered her, partly because the questions deserved answers, partly because there was something so completely businesslike about the whole exchange that he couldn't find to insert the speech without it sounding exactly like what it was, a retreat. "The house needs work," he said at one point. He wasn't sure why he said it. It wasn't a concession, it was just a fact. "Most houses do," she said. "I'm not saying that to lower your expectations." "I don't have expectations," Eliza said. "I have plans. Those are different." He glanced at her sideways. "What's the difference?" "Expectations depend on other people," she said. "Plans depend on work." He looked back at the road. After a moment, he said, "You're not what I thought you'd be." "What did you think I'd be?" He considered the question honestly. "Desperate," he said. The word sat between them for a moment. "I am desperate," Eliza said quietly. "I just don't think desperation is something you're supposed to lead with." She paused. "What are you? What do you mean? You met me at the platform. You haven't said anything about the arrangement. You haven't told me whether we're still going through with it." She kept her eyes forward. "So I'm asking, what are you?" Nathan said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, undecided. She nodded. "That's honest, at least." When they arrived at the ranch, the late afternoon light had turned the hills gold in that particular way that he used to love, and now mostly tried not to look at. He pulled the wagon to a stop and watched, as Eliza stepped down with her suitcase and turned to look at the property with those steady, assessing eyes. He waited for the complaints, for the disappointment, for the careful diplomatic language of someone realizing they had made a mistake. Instead, she walked to the fence line, ran one hand along the top rail, tested its stability, and said, "How long has it been since anyone helped you take care of this place?" The question caught him somewhere he hadn't been caught in a long time. Because the honest answer, the answer that he had never once said out loud to anyone, not to Thomas, not to the handful of ranch hands who had quit over the past 3 years, because they couldn't work for a man who had stopped caring whether the work got done, was simple. Since Clara, he didn't say that, he said a while. Eliza looked at the fence for another moment. Then she looked at him. "I can help with that," she said, "if you want the help." Nathan Walker had spent 3 years making sure he didn't want anything from anyone. He looked at the woman standing at his fence, travel-worn and red-eyed and entirely steady, and he said, "I'll show you the house." Which was not an answer, but it was somehow the beginning of one. The first week was an exercise in careful distance. Nathan established it immediately and maintained it with the disciplined thoroughness of a man who had been practicing solitude long enough to have elevated it to an art form. Meals were at set times. The kitchen was hers in the mornings, he ate in the evenings. The ranch work was divided cleanly. He handled the cattle and the outer fences. She handled the household and the records. They communicated in the practical language of people who have agreed to share a space without agreeing to share anything else. It worked. And it worked because Eliza did not push against it. He had expected pushing. He had prepared for it, built his perimeter carefully, ready to hold the line when she tried to cross it with questions or kindness, or the kind of persistent warmth that was, in his experience, harder to defend against than anger. But Eliza Harper did not push. She simply worked, quietly, steadily, with the particular focused energy of someone who has decided that what they do matters more than whether anyone else notices it. Nathan noticed it anyway. He noticed it on the 3rd day, when he came in from the south pasture to find the kitchen clean, in a way it hadn't been since the year before Clara died, not just swept but organized, every implement in its place. The pantry inventoried with a handwritten list pinned to the inside of the door. He noticed it on the 5th day, when he was repairing the bridle on his oldest horse and found, without quite knowing how it had gotten there, a cup of coffee sitting on the fence post nearest to where he was working. Hot, no note, no acknowledgement, just there. He didn't say anything about it. But he drank it. On the 7th day, he came home after dark to find Eliza sitting at the kitchen table with the ranch ledgers open in front of her, a lamp pulled close, her face entirely absorbed in whatever she was reading. She didn't look up when he came in. "You've been operating at a loss for 2 seasons, she said. Nathan stopped in the doorway. "You went through the ledgers." "You didn't tell me not to." She looked up then, meeting his eyes directly. "I should have asked first. I'm sorry for that. But I want to understand the situation." He crossed the room slowly, pulled out the chair across from her, and sat down. He looked at the ledgers. He had not opened them in 6 months. The numbers in them made him feel like something was pressing on his chest. "What do you understand?" he asked. "That the herd is healthy but small. That you lost 2 good pastures when the creek changed course after that flood 2 years ago. That you're paying for supplies at Cole's store on credit, and the interest is eating into whatever margin you had." She paused. "And that you know all of this already." "Yes," he said. "Then you also know it's fixable." He looked at her. "Do I? The eastern pasture isn't as ruined as the survey marks it," she said. "The soil dried out wrong, but it dried out. Another season with the right grass seed and cattle rotation, it comes back. The store credit can be restructured if you have something to negotiate with, which you do. Cole needs access to your northern water rights more than he lets on." She tapped the ledger. "And your herd isn't too small if you sell the right stock at Billings in the fall instead of the local auction where Cole drives the prices down." The kitchen was quiet. Nathan looked at the woman across from him, the one he had driven home a week ago, intending to send back east on the first available train. "How do you know about grass rotation?" he said finally. "My father was a farmer, before the debts took the land," Eliza said. "I grew up learning it. I've also been reading." She reached to the side and pulled out a stack of pamphlets he recognized as agricultural circulars from the land office in Helena. She had apparently retrieved them from the pile of correspondence he had let accumulate, unopened, near the door. "You have a better situation here than you think you do," she said. "You just haven't been paying attention to it." The words were not an accusation. They were stated the same way she stated everything directly, without ornamentation, with the implicit assumption that facts were useful, and there was no point in dressing them up. Nathan Walker had not had someone sit across from him and tell him something useful about the ranch in 3 years. He hadn't realized until exactly this moment how much he had missed it. "I'll think about the eastern pasture," he said. It was not a thank you, but it was in its way something close. 3 weeks into the arrangement, Nathan made his first mistake. He was in town for supplies, something he usually arranged to do quickly and alone, in and out without conversation, which was achievable in Millhaven if you moved with purpose and didn't make eye contact at the wrong moments. He had almost managed it when Margaret Holloway caught him outside the dry goods store. Margaret was 63, had been married 4 times to progressively more interesting husbands, and had appointed herself the unofficial social record keeper of Millhaven County, sometime around 1871. She was also, to her credit, not malicious, just relentlessly curious. "Nathan Walker," she said, "how is your wife?" He opened his mouth to correct her. "She's not my wife. The arrangement hasn't been formalized. Nothing has been decided," and then stopped. Because he didn't know what to say. The arrangement. It had been 3 weeks, and he had not said the word marriage once. Eliza had not said it either. They had existed in this careful, productive, strangely comfortable limbo where they worked alongside each other during the day, and ate supper in the same room at night, and occasionally had conversations that lasted long enough to stop being purely functionals. And somehow, neither of them had addressed the ancestral fact of why she was there. "She's fine," Nathan said. Margaret beamed. "I heard she gave Richard Cole a piece of her mind at the station," she said. "Half the town is still talking about it. A woman with that kind of backbone." She shook her head approvingly. "You need that, Nathan. You needed someone with backbone." He paid for his supplies and left. On the ride home, he turned the conversation over in his mind and realized the problem. The town had already decided, in the absence of any statement from Nathan about the nature of the arrangement. The town of Millhaven had filled in the silence with the obvious conclusion. Nathan Walker had sent for a bride had arrived. As far as anyone watching could tell, she was still there. Therefore the matter was settled. Richard Cole, he understood with sudden clarity, would not let it stay settled. He was right. He got home to find Liza in the yard, and he could tell, by the angle of her shoulders before he even pulled the wagon to a stop, that something had happened. She turned when she heard the wheels, and her face had the controlled expression of someone who has processed a difficulty and decided not to make it someone else's problem. "Cole sent a man," she said. Nathan climbed down. "What did he say?" "He said Cole was prepared to offer a fair price for the northern water rights. He said the offer was being made as a courtesy to a new bride who might want the security of cash money rather than uncertain ranching prospects." She paused. "He said the offer was good for 48 hours, and that I should make sure you understood the generous nature of it." Nathan's jaw tightened. "He came here while I was out," he said. "Yes," her voice was even. "I told him the property was not for sale, and that you could be reached in town if Mr. Cole had a serious business matter to discuss." Nathan looked at her. "I told him," she added carefully, "that as a new bride, I was certain my husband would appreciate Mr. Cole's concern for our financial welfare, and that I would be sure to pass along his thoughtful offer the moment my husband returned." She paused. I said it with a completely straight face. Despite everything, despite the tension in his chest, the familiar surge of anger toward Cole, the complicated awareness that this woman had just defended a position in an arrangement that neither of them had officially agreed to, despite all of it, something almost like a smile crossed Nathan Walker's face. It lasted about 2 seconds before he controlled it. But Eliza saw it, and for a brief moment, something shifted in her expression, a flicker of something that was not quite surprise, not quite warmth, but occupied the same general neighborhood as both. "Thank you," he said. "Of course," she said. She went back inside. Nathan stood in the yard for a moment longer, looking at the hills, feeling the particular weight of a life that had been arranged for grief, and was quietly, stubbornly, beginning to rearrange itself around something else. He wasn't ready to name what that something was, but it was there. And for the first time in 3 years, he did not try to push it away. The smile lasted 2 seconds. Nathan had counted them without meaning to 1, then 2, then gone, and in the days that followed he found himself thinking about those than he had any reasonable justification for. Not with warmth, exactly. More with the unsettled awareness of a man who has been certain about something for a very long time, and has just encountered evidence that complicates that certainty. He did not know what to do with that evidence. So he did what Nathan Walker had done, with most things he didn't know what to do with, over the past 3 years. He worked. He was up before 4 every morning, out to the barn while the dark was still complete, and the cold had that particular clean edge that Montana mornings carried even in summer. He fed the horses, checked the cattle in the near pasture, repaired whatever had broken overnight, and by the time the sun was properly above the hills, he had already put in half a workday's worth of effort. It was the kind of schedule that left no room for thinking about anything that wasn't immediately in front of him, which had been, since Clara, the entire point. Eliza matched it. That was the thing he hadn't anticipated. He had expected her to keep reasonable hours, to be up at 6, perhaps, the way he imagined women from the city managed things. Instead, he found her in the kitchen before 5. On the second morning, already working through the pantry inventory, with a lamp and a pencil, and what appeared to be a complete indifference to the hour. She looked up when he came in, registered his presence, and went back to her counting. "You don't have to be up this early," he said. "I know," she said. He stood there for a moment. "The lamp oil is expensive. I'll account for it." She wrote something in the margin of her list. "There's coffee if you want it." He poured himself a cup and left. But he noticed. He noticed the way she worked through problems quietly, instead of bringing them to him immediately, the way she would sit with the ledgers, or the supply lists, for a long time before she asked him anything, which meant that when she did ask, the question was already half answered, and she just needed confirmation. He noticed the way she spoke to the 2 remaining ranch hands, Hector and young Pete, with a directness that was never condescending, always clear, and produced results twice as efficiently as his own silence had managed to. He noticed, on a Thursday afternoon, when he came back from the north pasture 2 hours earlier than expected, that she was sitting on the fence near the barn, talking to his oldest horse, a gray mare named Widow, who had liked Clara, and had tolerated everyone else with the easy one-sided conversation of someone who was not performing for an audience and did not know she had one. He stopped at the edge of the yard and watched. Widow, who had not let anyone except Nathan put a hand to her in 3 years, was standing with her head angled toward Eliza's voice. Nathan turned around and went back to the north pasture. He told himself it meant nothing. The problem was that he was a man who had spent 36 years being honest about practical things, and the practical truth of the situation was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Something was happening in this house. Not a dramatic something, not the kind of thing that announced itself and demanded to be addressed. Something quieter and more persistent, like water working at stone. Small, daily, relentless. It frightened him in a way that nothing had frightened him since the morning he learned Clara was gone. He was sitting with that fear one evening, the evening of the 4th week, though he hadn't been counting, when his father arrived unannounced with a bottle of decent whiskey and the carefully arranged expression of a man who absolutely had not planned this visit at all. "Just passing through," Thomas said. "You live 12 miles away," Nathan said. "Nobody passes through 12 miles. I had business in Millhaven. At 7 in the evening. Late business." Thomas came inside and sat down at the kitchen table with the ease of a man who has been coming to this kitchen his entire life, which he had. He set the whiskey on the table. "Is she here?" "She went to bed early." "She works hard, yes." Thomas poured 2 glasses. He said nothing for a while, and Nathan sat across from him and said nothing either. And between the two of them, they managed an entire conversation in that silence, the kind that only works between people who have known each other long enough to stop needing words for certain things. Then Thomas said, "She fixed the root cellar door." Nathan looked at him. "Margaret Holloway told me," Thomas said. "Said she saw the girl working on it 3 days ago. The hinge that's been broken since the winter of '83. He paused. "I offered to fix that hinge 4 times, I know. You told me you'd get to it. I was going to get to it. It's been 3 years, Nathan." The kitchen was quiet again. Nathan turned his glass in his hands. The whiskey was good. He drank it too fast for something that good. "She asked me," he said finally, "why I stopped caring about the ranch." Thomas went very still. "What did you say?" "I said I hadn't stopped caring." "Is that true?" The question was gentle. It was also the sharpest thing his father had said to him in 3 years, which was saying something. Because Thomas Walker was not a man who avoided sharp questions. He had simply, out of love, stopped asking them. Nathan set his glass down. "I don't know," he said. Thomas nodded slowly. "That's different from no." "It's not the same as yes." "No," Thomas agreed. "But it's different from no." He finished his whiskey, stood, picked up his coat. He paused at the door. "The eastern pasture," he said. "Hector told me she had him running the soil tests. Said she read about a grass variety that would take to the drainage conditions." He looked at his son. "She's trying to save this place, Nathan. Whether you're trying or not." Nathan said nothing. Thomas left. Nathan sat at the table for a long time after that, the whiskey and the silence and the weight of his father's words pressing down on him in the dark, and he thought about Clara. Because he always thought about Clara. That was the one thing in his life that had remained perfectly consistent. But tonight, for the first time, the thinking felt different. Less like sinking, and more like standing in shallow water. Like the grief was still there, all of it, every gram of it, but it was not the only thing in the room anymore. That terrified him. He went to bed without resolving anything. But he lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the ranch at night, the horses, the wind, the occasional distant sound of cattle, and thought about hinge pins and soil tests. And a woman who woke up before 5 in the morning, because she had decided that this broken-down place was worth saving, and he could not for the life of him figure out why that made his chest feel the way it did. The next morning he fixed the fence line on the south pasture that had been on his mental list for 2 months. He didn't mention it to anyone. He just did it. When Eliza came out to check on the water trough in the afternoon and passed the south fence, she stopped. Ran her hand along the new repair, the same way she had run her hand along the fence rail on the first day. Then she kept walking. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. But something passed between them in that silence. Something that both of them recognized, and neither of them was ready to name. It was the first thing they had shared that was not entirely practical. It lasted about 10 seconds, and then Richard Cole's man came back. This time he came in the middle of the day, when Nathan was visible in the yard, and could not be missed, and this time he did not bother with the polite framing of the first visit. Cole's man was named Denton, lean, weathered, with the specific kind of pleasantness that is actually a threat wearing manners, and he rode up to the yard fence and waited until Nathan walked over. "Mr. Cole wanted me to check whether you'd given any more thought to his offer," Denton said. "The answer is no. He thought you might feel that way. Denton shifted in his saddle. He asked me to mention that the water rights question is a bigger issue than you might be accounting for. Specifically, he said to tell you that his survey of the county water access has turned up some, let's say, irregularities in the original land grant. The kind that might require legal clarification. He paused. A process like that could take years, cost a fair amount to manage. And while it was being sorted out, the land itself would be tied up. Hard to operate a ranch in that situation. Nathan looked at him for a long moment. "Tell Cole," he said, "that I've spoken with the land office in Helena, and the county recorder has confirmed my grant is clean." It was a lie. He had not spoken with anyone. But Denton couldn't know that. The man studied him for a moment, then nodded, touched his hat, and rode away. Nathan turned back toward the house. Eliza was standing in the doorway. She had heard enough. "He's going to come at the water rights," she said. "Yes. Do we have documentation from the land office?" He looked at her. The word "we" landed in a way he hadn't expected. Not uncomfortably, just squarely, like a thing set down in exactly the place it belonged. "Not yet," he said. "Then we need it," she said. "I can write to Helena today. If we have the original grant papers and I write carefully, they'll confirm within 2 weeks." She paused. "Do you have the original papers?" "In the chest in the study." "Clara organized them." He stopped. The silence that followed was brief and careful. "I can find them," Eliza said. Her voice had not changed. No inflation of the moment. No cautious gentleness that would have made it worse. "Just steady if you tell me which chest." "The oak one," he said. "Left side of the room." She nodded and went inside. Nathan stood in the yard for a moment, breathing through something he couldn't quite identify. Then he followed her in. The study had not been properly entered since Clara died. He had gone in twice, once to retrieve a deed he needed, and once to look for something he couldn't remember now. Both times he had gone in quickly and come out quickly. And both times the specific quality of the light. In that room, the particular way the afternoon came through, the single window had hit him somewhere between the ribs, in a way that made the walls feel like they were moving. Eliza had the chest open when he came in. She was kneeling beside it, going through the papers with the same careful, organized attention she brought to everything. She did not look up. "These are the land records," she said. "And these look like water rights documentations from 1879. That's them." She set them aside carefully, started to close the chest. Then stopped. He knew what she'd found. He couldn't see it from where he stood, but he knew. There was only one thing in that chest that would make her hands go still like that. It was a photograph. Clara had had it, made in Billings, the year they married. She had thought it was a grand adventure, sitting still for long enough for the photographer to capture her, and she had laughed all the way home about how serious she'd had to look for it. The photograph looked nothing like the way she actually was, except in the eyes. In the eyes it was exactly her. "I'm sorry," Eliza said quietly. Not the elaborate, careful apology of someone managing a moment. Just those 2 words, direct, and then she placed the photograph back in the chest and closed it, and stood up with the land papers. "I'll write the letter this afternoon," she said. Nathan said, "Thank you." She left the room. He stood there for a moment, in the light from the window, and found that the walls were not moving. The room was just a room. The grief was still there. It would always be there. He understood that now without fighting it, but there was something else in the room with it. Something that had come in with a woman who knelt beside a chest of someone else's history and treated it with exactly the respect it deserved. He didn't know what to call that something. He went back outside and kept working. 2 days later, he made his second mistake. It happened because of a horse, which was fitting, since most of the things in Nathan Walker's life had happened because of horses. One of the younger steers had gotten through a gap in the fence and had spooked. Hector's cutting horse in the process, and by the time Nathan reached the situation, there was a badly spooked horse, a frightened steer, and Hector on the ground, with a possible broken hand from where he'd hit the fence post coming off the horse. Nathan handled the steer, then the horse, then got Hector inside and looked at the hand, which was badly swollen but probably not broken, probably sprained, which was only slightly better, and told him to rest it for 3 days. "I can still work," Hector said, "not with that hand." "Senior Walker, the fences. I'll handle the fences." Nathan paused. "Go rest the hand." He was on the second fence repair of the afternoon, working fast to cover what 2 men should have been handling, when Eliza appeared beside him. She didn't ask. She picked up the other end of the rail he was positioning and held it steady while he drove the nail. "You don't have to," he started. "I've set fence rails before," she said. "That's not what I know what you meant," she said. "But I can help, and you need help, so let's not make it more complicated than that." They worked in silence. After that efficient, practical silence, the kind that happens between people who are good at working and have stopped needing to explain themselves to each other. An hour into it, Nathan noticed that she had moved to the next section before he had to direct her, that she had assessed the repair order correctly on her own, and was already pulling the bad rail before he got there. He watched her for a moment, without her knowing he was watching. She had her sleeves rolled past her elbows. Her hair, which she usually kept pinned with a thoroughness that suggested she had opinions about things coming loose, had mostly escaped and was doing what it wanted. She was wrestling a fence rail into position with the focused physicality of someone who had decided to win that particular argument, and she was winning it. Something happened in Nathan Walker's chest. It was sudden and unwelcome and absolutely unmistakable, and he had not felt it in 3 years, and he did not want to feel it now. He looked away. He drove a nail into a post with considerably more force than the nail required. They finished the fence line by late afternoon. Eliza was surveying the last repair when young Pete came running from the direction of the road with the particular urgency that meant something had happened in town, that someone felt required immediate communication. "There's a notice," Pete said breathlessly. "Posted at the county office." Mr. Cole filed a survey challenge on the North Water access. Eliza turned to look at Nathan. Nathan said nothing for a moment. Cole hadn't waited for his bluff to be called. He'd gone straight to the county office and filed before Nathan had documentation in hand, which meant the notice would stand for 30 days minimum while the challenge was reviewed, which meant during those 30 days, Nathan could be compelled to restrict access to the water, which would damage the herd going into the dry season. "How long ago?" Nathan asked. "This morning," Pete said. "I heard it at the feed store." Cole had filed this morning. While Denton was sitting on his horse in Nathan's yard, pretending the conversation was still a negotiation. "He filed while his man was here," Eliza said. Her voice was quiet and exact. "He sent Denton to make sure you were home and occupied while the clerk posted the notice." She had arrived at the same conclusion half a second before he had. He looked at her. "The letter to Helena," she said. "I can ride to Millhaven today and send it by telegraph instead. That gets us a response in 2 days instead of 2 weeks. The telegraph office charges by word. I'll be efficient," she said. He almost smiled. "Almost. Take the gray mare," he said. "She's faster." Eliza had already turned toward the barn. Then she stopped, turned back. "Nathan," she said. It was the first time she had used his given name. He registered it, the way you register a change in weather, not dramatically. Just a physical awareness that something in the atmosphere had shifted. "He's doing this because he thinks you're alone," she said. "He thinks you don't have anyone who understands what he's doing or how to fight it. So he's moving now, before you're settled." She paused. He miscalculated. She went to the barn. Nathan stood in the yard and listened to the sound of hoofbeats as the gray mare carried her away toward Millhaven. And he thought about what she'd said he miscalculated, and the particular confidence with which she'd said it. Not as reassurance, but as assessment. As a woman who had looked at a situation and arrived at a conclusion she was prepared to stand behind. He thought about the fence rail, the ledgers, the coffee on the fence post he had never acknowledged. He thought about her saying his name. He went inside and sat at the kitchen table with Cole's pattern of moves laid out, in his mind, like a chess problem, and he worked through it the same way he worked through everything, practical, methodically, from the edges inward, and by the time Eliza came back 2 hours later, with the telegraph sent and a response timeline confirmed, he had a plan. Not a complete one, but a beginning. They sat at the table together and worked through it until the lamp was burning low, their voices quiet and practical, the kitchen warm with the particular warmth of two people working toward the same thing. At some point Eliza made more coffee without asking if he wanted it and set a cup in front of him, and he said thank you. And she said you're welcome, and they went back to the map of the water rights she had drawn from memory of the county land records. It was almost 10 o'clock when Nathan said, "The original survey from 1878 puts the North Creek boundary 40 yards east of where Cole's challenge places it." "I know," Eliza said. "I found a reference to it in the land records from the chest." She hesitated slightly on the last words. "I wrote it into the letter." He looked at her across the table. The lamplight was doing something to her face that he deliberately did not allow himself to think about. "That reference is the case," he said. "If Helena confirms it, Cole's challenge falls apart." "Yes," she said. "You found that in an afternoon." "I was looking for it," she said simply. "Sometimes things turn up when you look for them." The silence that followed was different from the silences that had come before it. Not the careful distance of strangers, not the practical quiet of people working. Something else. Something that had been building in small daily increments for 4 weeks, and had now arrived at a moment where it could not be entirely ignored. Nathan looked at the map on the table. "Eliza," he said. Yes, he thought about what he wanted to say. He had several options. The practical one, the honest one. The one that he had been practicing, in various forms, for 4 weeks, the version where he explained, carefully, that he was grateful for her help, but that she should understand his situation, that this arrangement had not been his choice, that he was not capable of what she might be hoping for. He said, "Why are you doing this?" She considered the question. Not defensively, just considered it. "Because it's the right thing to do," she said. "And because I'm good at it." She paused, and because she stopped. "Because what?" She looked at him directly. "Because everyone in this county has decided who you are," she said. "And I'm not sure they're right." Nathan looked at her for a long moment. "You might find," he said finally, "that they are." "I might," she agreed, "but I'd rather find out for myself." He had nothing to say to that. He looked back at the map. She looked back at the map. The lamp burned steadily between them. Outside, the ranch made its nighttime sounds, the horses, the wind, moving through the grass that was already, imperceptibly, beginning to come back in the eastern pasture. Nathan Walker sat in his kitchen with a woman he had invited here, intending to send away, and he felt the weight of the past 3 years shift, just slightly, on his shoulders. Not lift, not disappear, just shift the way a load shifts when someone else puts their hand to it without being asked. He did not say anything about it, but he sat there for another hour, working through the water rights problem, with a woman who had decided, for reasons he could not fully account for, that his case was worth making. And when she finally said good night and went to her room, Nathan Walker sat alone at the kitchen table for a while longer, with the map and the lamp and the quiet, and felt something he had spent 3 years, being certain he would never feel again. He felt like fighting, not for himself. He had stopped fighting for himself a long time ago. But for the ranch, for the eastern pasture coming back. For the gray mare who had apparently decided to tolerate someone new. He sat with that feeling carefully, the way you handle something that might break, and told himself it was just the water rights situation. Just the practical necessity of someone who needed defending. He told himself that for a long time. He almost believed it. But somewhere in the careful architecture of that almost, in the small precise space between what he told himself and what he knew, Nathan Walker was already beginning to understand that Richard Cole was not the only thing in Millhaven County he had miscalculated. The response from Helena arrived on a Tuesday. Nathan was in the north pasture when Pete came riding hard to find him, waving something white against the sky, the telegraph paper, folded twice, still carrying the faint smell of the office where it had been printed. Nathan took it without dismounting, read it once, then read it again more slowly. The land office had confirmed the original 1878 survey boundary. The North Creek access belonged to the Walker Grant, unambiguously and without qualification. Cole's challenge had no legal foundation. The county recorder had already been notified. Nathan folded the paper, sat on his horse in the north pasture for a moment, with the dry summer wind moving across the grass. Then he turned the horse and rode back at a pace that was, for the first time in 3 years, something approaching urgency. Eliza was at the kitchen table when he came in. She looked up from the accounts she was working through, read his face before he said anything, and set her pencil down. He held out the paper. She read it. He watched her face as she did the careful focus, the slight shift in her jaw. When she reached the confirmation, the controlled breath she released when she finished. "Cole's going to know by tomorrow," she said. "He probably already knows," Nathan said. "He'll have someone watching the county office. Then we have tonight." "Tonight for what?" She looked at him steadily. "To decide what we do next. Because this wins the legal fight, but Cole doesn't lose legal fights and stop. He changes tactics." She paused. "We need to be ready for what comes after the water rights." Nathan pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. They worked through it for 2 hours, not in the careful, tentative way of the early weeks, each of them testing the edges of what the other would accept, but directly, efficiently, finishing each other's logic without ceremony. At some point, Eliza reached past him for the county map and her arm brushed his, and neither of them acknowledged it. But Nathan felt it for the next 20 minutes, in a way that made concentration require active effort. By the time the lamp needed trimming, they had a plan. It was not a brilliant plan. It was a solid one, the kind built on facts rather than maneuvers, on the actual conditions of the land and the water and the relationships Nathan had in the county that he had been neglecting for 3 years. Eliza had cataloged those relationships with the same methodical attention she brought to everything else, and what she showed him, laid out plainly in her handwriting, was that Nathan Walker had more standing in Mill Haven County than he had been using. "These 4 families," she said, pointing to names on her list, "all run water from the same creek system. If Cole moves on your rights, he moves on theirs eventually. They know that." "I haven't spoken to the Donahues in 2 years," Nathan said. "I know," she said. "I had coffee with Martha Donahue last week." He stared at her. "She came to check on the garden situation," Eliza said simply. "We talked. She mentioned that her husband had been watching what Cole does with the county commission very carefully." She paused. "She said to tell you that Frank thinks you've been letting good fences go to waste." "What does that mean?" "I think it means that Frank Donahue is ready to stand with you if you ask him to." She looked at Nathan directly. "People have been waiting for you to come back, Nathan. They're not going to come and find you, but they'll meet you halfway." The kitchen was very quiet. Nathan looked at the list of names. Some of them he knew well, had known for years, had worked alongside, had laughed with at the kind of gatherings he no longer attended. They felt like people from a different version of his life. A version he had decided was finished. "I don't know how to do that anymore," he said. It was the most honest thing he had said to her since she arrived. Eliza did not offer him sympathy or reassurance. She just said, "Yes, you do. You've just been out of practice." He rode to the Donahue Ranch the following morning. Frank Donahue was 60, built like a man who had spent 40 years arguing with the land, and mostly winning, and he met Nathan in the yard with the handshake of someone who had been expecting this visit longer than Nathan had been planning it. They talked for an hour. Not about water rights, not immediately about cattle first, because that was the honest opening for 2 ranchers, and then about the dry season, and then about what Cole had been doing with the county commission appointments, And then, finally, about the survey challenge. Frank said, "I'll make some calls." Nathan said, "I'm not asking for charity." Frank said, "I'm not offering any. I'm protecting my own water. The fact that it helps you too is just arithmetic." Nathan rode home, feeling something he had nearly forgotten the texture of. It took him the better part of the ride to identify it. It was the feeling of not being alone. He told Eliza what Frank had said when he got back. She listened, nodded once, and said, "Good. That's 3 families on the creek system who'll back the survey confirmation. Cole can't fight that in county court without looking like he's attacking everyone." She went back to the butter she was making with the focused efficiency of someone crossing an item off a mental list. Nathan stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her. "You planned that," he said. "The coffee with Martha Donahue. You planned it before the Telegraph response came." "I planned it the week I reviewed the water rights records," she said without looking up. "I didn't know what the response would say. But I knew that the legal argument alone wouldn't be enough." "You've been doing this for how long?" She looked up then. "Since Cole's man came the second time," she said. "Someone who moves that fast has been planning longer than you knew. So I needed to move faster." He stood there for a moment. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you weren't ready to hear it," she said plainly. "You were still deciding whether to stay in this fight. I wasn't going to lay out a plan for a man who might walk away from it." She held his gaze. "But you rode to the Donahues this morning. So now I'm telling you." Nathan Walker had been underestimated enough times in his life to recognize the particular irritation of someone doing it to him. But this was not that. This was something different. A woman who had assessed him accurately, found him not quite ready, and worked around the gap while she waited for him to close it. He didn't know whether to be frustrated or grateful. He settled, reluctantly, on grateful. "What else have you done?" he asked. She set the butter paddle down. "I've spoken with the feed store owner about Cole's pricing practices. I've confirmed with the county recorder's clerk that Cole has filed 3 other survey challenges in the past 4 years, all withdrawn when the other party lawyered up. I've written to a land attorney in Billings who handles water rights cases," he responded yesterday, and confirmed Cole's strategy is a pressure tactic, not a genuine legal claim. She paused. "And I've written to the Agricultural Bureau about the Eastern Pasture restoration. If we can get a Bureau endorsement for the soil recovery, we can apply for a small development credit that would let us buy the seed we need without touching the operating accounts." The silence in the kitchen was the specific silence of a man who has just discovered that someone has been building a fortress around him while he was busy looking the other way. "The Bureau credit," he said slowly. "How did you know about that?" "I read," she said. "The circulars from Helena had a notice about the program in the March edition." She looked at him with a directness that was, somehow, not unkind. "Nathan, the tools to save this ranch have been sitting in your correspondence pile for 2 years. You just stopped opening mail." He had no answer for that. Because it was true. He had stopped opening mail around the same time he stopped doing a lot of things. The mail had piled up near the door, and he had walked past it every day, telling himself he would get to it when things were less difficult. And things had remained exactly as difficult as he made them, because he had stopped using the tools that would have helped. "I'll go through the pile," he said. "I already did," she said. "I sorted it. There are 3 items that need your response. Everything else I've handled or filed." He stood very still for a moment. Then he said, "You went through my mail." Her chin came up slightly. "Yes," without asking. "Yes, no apology, no retreat. I also replanted the kitchen garden, renegotiated the spring supply order with the Millhaven store to cut 12% off the quarterly cost, and repaired the chicken coop roof before it collapsed on the chickens." She held his gaze. "I did all of it without asking. If you'd prefer I ask about everything first, I will do that. But I want you to understand that asking about everything first would require you to be present, and for the first month you were not entirely present." The word landed between them with precision, not an accusation. A fact. Nathan took a slow breath. You're right, he said. It was not an easy thing for him to say. He said it anyway. Something shifted in Eliza's face, not relief, not triumph, but a quiet recalibration, like a scale that has just been properly balanced. The 3 items that need your response, she said. When you have time. She picked up the butter paddle. He went to find the letters. He was still sitting with them, an hour later, when the sound of an unfamiliar horse in the yard brought him to the door. It was Denton. Cole's man sat on his horse in the yard with the easy posture of someone delivering a message they find amusing, and he waited until Nathan came out before he spoke. Mr. Cole wanted you to know, Denton said, that he's received word from the county office about your telegraph. He says congratulations are in order on the survey confirmation, a pause that carried everything Cole wanted it to carry. He also says he hopes the Walker operation has enough funds to handle the coming season, given the costs of legal correspondence and all. Said it'd be a shame for a man to win a water fight and then lose the ranch to an operating deficit. Tell Cole, Nathan said, that the Walker operation's finances are none of his business. He's just expressing neighborly concern. He can express it somewhere else. Denton smiled with his mouth only. He also said to tell you that the Millhaven Social on Saturday, the county harvest planning meeting, he's going to raise the question of water usage rights for the whole creek system. Said the community might benefit from a formal review. He paused. Said he hopes to see you there. Then he turned his horse and left. Nathan went back inside. Eliza was in the hallway. She had heard. He's moving the fight to the public meeting, she said. Yes, he's going to try to reframe it. Not Walker versus Cole. On water rights, the whole creek system needs review. He gets the community talking about regulation, and suddenly your confirmed rights are just one voice in a larger argument he controls. Yes, Nathan said. That's exactly what he's doing. Then we need to be at that meeting, she said. Not just you. Both of us. Nathan looked at her. The harvest planning meeting was the largest regular community gathering in Millhaven County. He had not attended it in 3 years. The last time he had gone, Clara had been at his side, and he had left early because he couldn't be in a room full of neighbors, asking how she was doing, and have to keep explaining that she wasn't. After that, he had simply stopped going. Nathan, Eliza said. He's chosen a public stage, because he thinks you won't show up for one. I know, will you? He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said yes. She nodded once, briskly, and went back to the kitchen. Nathan stood in the hallway and listened to the ranch settle around him, the horses, the wind, the sounds of a place that had been dormant for 3 years and was, board by board, beginning to breathe again. He was terrified, not of Cole. He had never been afraid of Cole, exactly contemptuous of him, wary of him, but not afraid. What frightened him about Saturday was simpler and more difficult. Walking into a room full of people who remembered the Nathan Walker, who used to laugh too loud at county dances, and having them see whatever he had become, instead. He carried that fear quietly through the rest of the week. On Thursday evening, his father appeared again with the whiskey and the arranged casualness, and this time Nathan was almost glad to see him. They sat at the kitchen table. Eliza had gone to bed early. She always seemed to know when the Walker men needed the room, and Thomas poured 2 glasses and waited. The Donahue visit, Thomas said. Frank told me. Of course he did. You look different. Nathan took his glass. Don't. I'm not saying anything. I'm saying you look different. I heard you. Thomas drank his whiskey, set the glass down. She's remarkable, Nathan. She's practical. That's not all she is. Don't, Nathan said again. The word was quieter this time. Not a warning, almost a plea. Thomas looked at his son for a long moment. I know what you're afraid of, he said. Good. Then you know not to push it. I know, Thomas said. I'm not going to push it. He refilled both glasses. I'm just going to say this once, and then I'll leave it alone. He waited until Nathan met his eyes. Loving someone and losing them doesn't prove that love is dangerous. It proves that it was real. The kitchen was quiet. That's what you tell yourself, Nathan said finally. That's what Clara would have told you, Thomas said. She did, as I recall, more than once. Nathan said nothing. Thomas finished his whiskey, stood, put on his coat. At the door he paused. "Saturday," he said. "I'll be there." He left. Nathan sat alone for a while. The whiskey was gone. The lamp was burning low. Somewhere in the house, in the room past the hallway, a woman who had arrived 5 weeks ago with a battered suitcase and a clear-eyed letter was asleep. And the whole shape of the house felt different because of it, fuller, somehow, more present in its own spaces. He thought about what his father had said. He thought about Clara, not the way he usually thought about her, which was with the particular gripping sorrow of someone holding something so tightly it left marks, but differently, with something closer to tenderness and less close to pain. He thought about her laugh, the photograph, the way she had organized those papers in the oak chest, with her careful handwriting labeling every folder. He thought about Eliza, finding that photograph and saying "I'm sorry" in exactly the right way, and then moving forward, because that was what the moment required. He went to bed. Saturday arrived the way important things in Millhaven arrived, announced by the activity of the whole county, moving toward the same place. Nathan hitched the wagon and came out to find Eliza already waiting in the yard, dressed carefully in the best of her limited wardrobe, her hair pinned with unusual precision. She was wearing the expression of a woman who had prepared for something and was now managing the particular discipline of waiting to begin. She looked at him when he came out. "You're wearing the good coat," she said. "It's a meeting." "Yes," she said. "It is." They rode to Millhaven in the comfortable silence that had become their default, not empty, not strained, just the silence of two people who had run out of the need to fill every gap. Nathan drove. Eliza sat beside him with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the road ahead, and once, when the wagon hit a rut and she caught his arm briefly for balance, neither of them said anything about it. The meeting hall was full when they arrived. Nathan had expected to walk in and feel the particular weight of a room, noticing someone who had been absent, and he did feel that the slight shift in conversations, the heads turning, the recalibration of attention. What he had not expected was the number of people who came to him directly and immediately. Frank Donahue shook his hand without ceremony and positioned himself beside him, which was a statement that required no words. Two of the other Creek System ranchers followed. Margaret Holloway clasped his arm and said, "There you are," as if he had merely stepped out for 5 minutes rather than 3 years. A younger man he barely recognized introduced himself as the new schoolteacher and said that his wife had been hoping to meet Mrs. Walker properly, Mrs. Walker. Nathan did not correct him. He glanced at Eliza. She was already in conversation with Martha Donahue and 2 other women, and she caught his glance briefly across the room and held it for a beat before returning to what she'd been saying. Cole arrived 20 minutes after the meeting started. He came in with 3 of his men and 2 members of the county commission, who had the careful expressions of people who know they are accompanying someone who will shortly make things difficult. Cole himself was impeccable, well-dressed, confident, carrying the easy authority of a man who had been the largest economic force in the county for long enough. That authority had become a physical habit. He saw Nathan immediately. His eyes moved from Nathan to Eliza and stayed there for a moment, with an assessment that made Nathan's jaw tighten. Then Cole smiled and turned to the room. The meeting opened with the standard business crop projections, road maintenance, the school fund. Nathan sat through it with the patience of a man who knows the real item is at the end of the agenda. When Cole rose to speak, he did it with the measured care of someone who had prepared thoroughly. "I want to raise something for the community's consideration," Cole said, in the tone of a man doing everyone a favor. The Creek System water access in the North County has been operating under individual land grant allocations that date back to the original surveys. As the county grows, and as our collective water needs develop, it might serve us all well to consider a formal county commission review of the water usage rights across the whole system. He looked around the room with benevolent concern. Not to disturb any existing rights, simply to ensure that the community as a whole has clarity on access going forward. He paused. Let it settle. Several people were nodding. The commission members were nodding. It sounded, as Cole had designed it to sound, entirely reasonable. Nathan stood up. The room went quiet, with the specific quality of a room that has been expecting something. The county land office confirmed our survey boundary this week, Nathan said. He kept his voice even. Our water access is documented and clean. I appreciate Mr. Cole's concern for community clarity. He paused. I'd also point out that Mr. Cole has filed survey challenges against 3 other landowners in the past 4 years. All 3 were withdrawn when the landowners produced their original documentation. He looked at Cole directly. I'd be happy to share the land office confirmation with anyone here who wants to see it. The room was very quiet. Cole's face had not changed. But something behind his eyes had. Mr. Walker, Cole said pleasantly, I'm not suggesting anything adverse to your situation. I'm raising a community water planning question. Then I'd suggest, said Frank Donahue from beside Nathan, without standing up, without raising his voice, that any community water planning conversation include all the landowners on the creek system, and that it happen with the county recorder present, not just the commission. 2 of the other creek ranchers made sounds of agreement. The commission members exchanged glances. Cole looked at the room. He was very good at reading rooms. He read this one in about 4 seconds and understood that it was not the room he had arranged to walk into. Nathan had not just come to the meeting. Nathan had come with people behind him, which was a thing that had not been true in 3 years, and that Cole had, evidently, not accounted for. Of course, Cole said, with the gracious flexibility of a man changing strategy in real time. A proper community process. Absolutely. I'll propose it to the recorder's office next week. He sat down. He would not propose anything to the recorder's office. They all knew that. But he could not press the issue tonight without making the confrontation explicit, and an explicit confrontation in front of 30 witnesses was not what he had planned for. Nathan sat down. Eliza, from her seat on the other side of the room, was looking at him. He could feel it before he turned. When he did turn, she held his gaze for a moment, and then gave the smallest possible nod, barely a movement, really, just a slight lowering and raising of her chin that said, clearly and completely, exactly what he needed it to say. You did well. He looked forward again. The rest of the meeting proceeded normally. Afterward, in the general movement of people leaving, Cole appeared at Nathan's side, with the smooth predictability of a man who always needed the last word. Walker, he said quietly, you've got some fight back in you. I'll give you that. I never lost it, Nathan said. I just wasn't using it on you. Cole looked at him for a moment. Then his eyes moved past Nathan to where Eliza was saying goodbye to Martha Donahue. Your wife, Cole said, in a tone that carried something carefully calibrated, is an impressive woman. Yes, Nathan said. She is. Shame, Cole said pleasantly. If the arrangement didn't work out. He walked away before Nathan could respond. Nathan stood very still for a moment after Cole left. The words had been a threat dressed as an observation. The specific threat was not immediately clear, which was the point. Cole wanted him off-balanced, uncertain about what direction the next attack would come from. He thought about what Eliza had said about Cole's tactics. That the man changed strategies when the legal route closed. That they needed to be ready for what came after the water rights. He had thought he understood what that meant. He was not sure he had understood it fully. On the ride home, the darkness around the wagon was complete, and the stars were very clear, and Eliza sat beside him, without speaking for a long time. Finally, she said, he threatened you at the end. Not directly. But he did, yes. She was quiet for another moment. What did he say exactly? Nathan told her. She absorbed it. He could feel her processing it beside him. That particular quality of concentration she had, the sense of a mind working through implications, quickly and without dramatizing them. He's going to try something personal, she said finally. Not legal. Something that goes at the relationship. What do you mean? I mean, she said carefully, that he's going to try to make trouble between us. Because if the arrangement falls apart, if I leave you alone again. And alone you're easier to break. She paused. He said shame if the arrangement didn't work out. He's already thinking about how to make that happen. The wagon moved through the dark. You think he can? Nathan said. A long pause. That depends, Eliza said quietly, on how solid the arrangement actually is. Nathan held the reins and looked at the road ahead of him, and the question she had not quite asked hung between them in the dark, like something with weight. He felt the shape of it. He felt the shape of everything that had been building for 5 weeks, the fence rails and the coffee, and the lamp, burning past 10, and his name in her voice, and the photograph in the chest, and his father's whiskey, and the smallest possible nod across a crowded room. He felt all of it. And he understood, with the particular clarity that sometimes comes very late at night, when you are tired enough to stop arguing with yourself, that the thing he had been protecting himself against for 3 years was not going to be kept away by the careful maintenance of distance. It was already inside the fence. He didn't know what to do with that. So he drove the wagon home in the dark, and helped Eliza down from the seat, and said good night at the door, and went to his room. But he lay awake for a long time. And somewhere in the quiet of the ranch, in the stillness between the question she hadn't quite asked and the answer he hadn't quite given, Nathan Walker felt the ground shifting under his feet slowly, irreversibly, like the beginning of something that could no longer be stopped. He was not ready, but ready, he was beginning to understand, was not going to be a condition he could arrange for. It was going to arrive on its own schedule, and it was very close now. Cole's next move came 9 days later, and it came in the form of a woman named Helen Marsh. Nathan didn't know Helen Marsh. That was the point. She arrived in Millhaven on the Wednesday stage, checked into the boarding house, and by Thursday morning she was having coffee with 3 of the most reliably talkative women in the county. A fact Nathan only learned because Margaret Holloway came to the ranch personally that afternoon, with the expression of someone carrying information they consider urgent. She says she knows Eliza, Margaret said. She was standing in the yard, and she had declined to come inside, which told Nathan the conversation was going to be short and uncomfortable. From St. Louis, she's been telling people things. Nathan kept his voice even. What things? That Eliza left St. Louis under difficult circumstances, that there were debts beyond what her father owed. Personal debts, that she came west because she had no other options, and that Margaret stopped. Pressed her lips together, that she had been engaged before. To a man in St. Louis, that she broke the engagement badly, and there was money involved. The yard was quiet. Is that what she's saying? Nathan said. She's saying it carefully, Margaret said. In the way where she sounds like she's defending Eliza while she's actually destroying her. She paused. Nathan, I don't know if any of it is true. What I know is that Richard Cole was seen having supper with this woman at the hotel last night, the night before she started talking. Margaret left. Nathan stood in the yard for a long time. Then he went inside. Eliza was at the kitchen table, with the Agricultural Bureau paperwork, working through the credit application with the meticulous attention she brought to anything she intended to win. She looked up when he came in and read his face the way she always read his face, quickly, accurately, without making a performance of it. What happened? She said. He told her. He told her plainly, without softening the edges, because she had earned plainness, and because he did not know how to deliver bad news any other way. He watched her face as he spoke, and saw the precise sequence of reactions. First, the recognition, then the anger, briefly visible, then the anger compressed into something smaller and more controlled. Then that final stillness she arrived at, when she was processing something she intended to handle, rather than merely react to. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Helen Marsh, she said. You know her, I know who she is. Her voice was level. She worked at the same dry goods company where my father had an account. When he died and the debts were being settled, she told the creditors about some personal money he had kept in a separate account, money he had set aside for me, for whenever I might need it. She told them about it before I knew they were asking. She paused. There was a previous engagement. It ended because he was dishonest about his finances. There was no money involved beyond what was already owed. But the way Helen tells a story, the way she always told stories, she stopped. Cole found her. Yes, he went looking for someone who knew me and would talk. Yes, Eliza set her pencil down on the table, very carefully. Like she was making sure she didn't break it. How bad is it, she said. What people are saying. Bad enough, Nathan said honestly. Margaret came herself, which means it's already moving fast. Eliza was quiet for another moment. Then she straightened in her chair, with the particular decision-making posture that Nathan had come to recognize the moment when she stopped processing and started acting. I need to go to town, she said. Eliza, not to argue with her, she said. Not to make a scene. I need to go to town and be seen, and I need to talk to people directly, and I need to do it before this sets. She met his eyes. Stories harden fast, Nathan. If I wait 2 days to let it settle, it won't settle. It'll calcify. She was right. He knew she was right. I'll drive you, he said. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, he said. I'll drive you. Something passed through her expression, quick, not quite named. Then she nodded and stood up and went to get her coat. They rode into Millhaven without much conversation. Nathan was aware, on the drive, of the particular quality of the silence between them. It had weight now, in a way it hadn't had even the week before. The question she had not quite asked on the night of the meeting was still there, still unanswered, and both of them were carrying it without addressing it, the way you carry something fragile across a rough road. Eliza went to the dry goods store first. Martha Donahue was there, and 2 other women Nathan recognized from the meeting, and he stayed near the door, while Eliza walked in and greeted them with complete naturalness, the way she always greeted people directly, without excess, without the performance of someone who has something to prove. He heard her say, to no one in particular, and everyone at once, I imagine you've all met Helen Marsh by now. The quality of attention in the store sharpened immediately. She and I have a history, Eliza said. I won't pretend otherwise. When my father died, the process of settling his estate was difficult, and Helen was involved in some of that difficulty. She paused. I don't know what she's told you. I'd rather you hear directly from me. My father left debts. I came west because I needed a new start, and I had a prior engagement that ended because the man I was engaged to was not honest with me. None of that is secret. I'd have told any of you the same thing if you'd asked. Martha Donahue said, nobody's asking. Some people are talking, Eliza said. Helen Marsh, Martha said firmly, arrived in this town 2 days ago. You've been here 6 weeks, and you've shown me more about who you are in 6 weeks than that woman showed me in 2 days of talking. She looked at the other women. I think I know which account I trust. The other women made sounds of agreement. It was not a complete victory, Nathan knew that, and he was certain Eliza knew it too. Stories did not die from one conversation, but it was a stake in the ground, and stakes in the ground mattered. He was still at the door when Eliza came back out. She did not look triumphant. She looked tired, in the way of someone who has done something necessary and drawn on reserves they didn't have to spare. Feed store, she said, then the post office, Eliza. I'm fine, she said. Let's finish it. They went to the feed store. They went to the post office. Everywhere they went, Nathan stayed close without being obvious about it, and everywhere they went, Eliza spoke with the same quiet directness and the same lack of performance. By mid-afternoon, he could feel the shape of the story in Millhaven, beginning to shift, not fully, not yet, but the edges of it were changing. It was at the post office that they encountered Helen Shen in person. She was not what Nathan had imagined. She was perhaps 40, well-dressed in the way of someone who considered appearance a tool, and she had the specific manner of a woman who operated through implications rather than statements. She came around the corner from the postal counter and stopped when she saw Eliza, with the controlled surprise of someone who had been prepared for this moment. Eliza, she said, pleasant, warm almost, Helen. Eliza's voice was completely even. "I heard you'd settled out here." Helen looked around at Nathan, at the post office clerk watching carefully, at the particular geography of the moment. "I thought it was such an interesting coincidence that I ended up passing through." "Richard Cole's invitation isn't a coincidence," Eliza said. The pleasant expression did not crack. It was too well built for that. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do," Eliza said. "I also think you know that what you're doing here won't work the way he told you it would. The people in this town make their own judgments." She paused. "I hope the trip was worth whatever he paid you for it. It's a long way to come for nothing." Helen looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Nathan, a measuring look, the kind that is trying to find a crack. Nathan looked back without giving her one. Helen said something non-committal and went out. The post office clerk, who had heard every word, was visibly trying to appear as if he had not. Nathan put his hand on the small of Eliza's back as they turned to leave, a reflex, not a decision, and felt her breath catch very slightly at the contact. He dropped his hand. They walked to the wagon. Neither of them mentioned it. On the drive home, the sky to the west was building the particular kind of dark that Montana used as a warning, and Nathan watched it with the professional attention of a rancher reading weather. It was going to storm. Not immediately tomorrow maybe, or the night after, but it was coming. The kind of late summer storm that hit hard and moved fast and left damage behind it that took a week to sort through. "She'll leave," Eliza said, about Helen Marsh, out of a silence that had lasted 20 minutes. "Cole will tell her there's no more use for her here, and she'll take the next stage." "Yes," Nathan said, "but the things she said don't leave with her." "No," he agreed, "they don't." Another silence. Then Eliza said quietly, "Does it change things, what she said? Does it change how you see the arrangement?" Nathan kept his eyes on the road. He thought about the question carefully, the way he thought about things that deserved care. "Did you break the engagement because of money?" he said. "No," she said, "I broke it because he lied to me." "The money was a symptom." "Then no," Nathan said. "It doesn't change anything." He felt her exhale slowly beside him. "For what it's worth," she said, "I would have told you. About the engagement, about all of it. I just hadn't found the right moment." "I know," he said. She turned to look at him. "How do you know?" "Because you don't operate through surprises," he said. "You're the most straightforward person I've ever met." The quiet that followed was different from the previous silences. Warmer, less careful at the edges. "Nathan," she said. Yes. She seemed to be working toward something. He could feel it, the particular quality of a person selecting words with more than usual attention. But before she could find them, the first crack of thunder came from the western hills, and the sky opened. It did not ease into rain. It arrived all at once, the way the serious storms always did. And in the time it took Nathan to get the wagon moving faster, the road had gone from dry to running with water, and the horses were pulling with the nervous energy of animals that wanted shelter immediately. They made it back to the ranch in the rain. Nathan got the horses into the barn and came out to find Eliza already at the outer fence line, pulling at the gate latch that had been sticking since June, and now, soaked and swollen, had decided to be completely uncooperative. He got there before she could wrench it and dealt with the latch himself, and for a moment they were standing very close together in the rain, both wet, the gate between them. She looked up at him, he looked at her. The rain was loud, and the world had shrunk to the space of the barnyard and the warm light coming from the house windows. And Nathan Walker stood in the middle of all of it and felt the thing he had been refusing to feel for 6 weeks arrive with the particular force of something that has been held back too long. He stepped back, latched the gate. "Get inside," he said. "You'll catch cold." The moment collapsed. Eliza looked at him for one beat, just one, with something that moved through her eyes too quickly for him to fully name. Then she went inside. Nathan stood in the rain for another moment. Then he went to check the cattle. The storm hit properly by midnight, the kind that shook the house and turned the creek from a steady flow to something that moved like it had somewhere urgent to be. Nathan was up at 2 in the morning when he heard the sound he had been half expecting since he saw the sky, the particular crack and groan of a fence section giving way under the pressure of water and wind. He was dressed and out the door in 3 minutes. The damage was to the south pasture fence. A 40-foot section had gone down where the post had been weakening for 2 seasons, and 3 of the cattle had already found the gap and moved through it into the dark. Nathan was working at the first repair by lantern light when he heard boots behind him and turned to find Eliza in her rain gear, carrying the spare wire and post mallet from the barn. "Go back inside," he said. "I found the cattle," she said. "Pete's bringing them around from the east. I told him to take them to the upper pasture away from the creek." She handed him the wire. "And we need both of us on this fence, or we'll lose the section entirely by morning." He took the wire. They worked through the storm for 3 hours. It was not graceful or comfortable. It was wet and cold and loud. And the lantern kept threatening to go out. And the posts were fighting every nail because the ground was too saturated to hold cleanly. But Eliza worked without complaint and without needing direction, moving to where she was needed before he asked, holding the wire tight when the tension was too much for one set of hands, digging the post footing with the focused physical determination of someone who had decided to win this particular argument with the weather. At one point, a gust took the lantern, and Nathan grabbed it, and they both reached for it at the same moment, and his hand closed over hers on the lantern handle. He held it, she held it. The storm was very loud around them. He let go, steadied the lantern. "I've got it," he said. "I know," she said. They went back to the fence. By 4 in the morning the section was repaired, not perfectly, not permanently, but enough to hold until proper daylight repairs could be made. Nathan stood back and looked at their work by lantern light and felt the particular exhausted satisfaction of a man who has done something hard and done it well enough. Eliza was beside him, both of them soaked, both of them breathing hard from the effort. 3 cattle accounted for, he said. Pete confirmed. All 3 in the upper pasture. The creek fence? Hector checked it at midnight. It's holding. He looked at the repair. "This'll need proper work in the morning." "Yes," she said. Neither of them moved. The rain had started to ease, not stopped, but changed character from the aggressive pounding of the main storm to the steady, workmanlike rain of an aftermath. The lantern made a circle of warm light in the middle of the wet dark. "I need to tell you something," Nathan said. He hadn't planned it. He hadn't planned anything. He was exhausted and soaked, and his hands were cut from the wire, and he was standing in a rainy field at 4 in the morning, which was possibly the worst possible circumstances for the conversation he had spent 6 weeks not having. He had it anyway. "I know you've been waiting," he said, "for me to be honest about the arrangement, about what it is or isn't." He stopped. Looked at the fence rather than at her. "I'm not good at this. I used to be better at it, and then I stopped being. But I know that you've been here 6 weeks, and you've put more into this ranch and into—" He stopped again. "And I've been giving you silence when you deserved more than that." Eliza was very still beside him. "I'm not going to tell you I'm over what happened," he said. "I'm not. I don't know if I ever will be, not entirely. But I know that the last 6 weeks have felt more like being alive again than anything has felt in 3 years. He made himself look at her. "And I know that Cole is right, that the arrangement is what holds this together. Which means I need to tell you what the arrangement actually is." From my side, she was watching him. "I don't want you to leave," he said. The rain came down steadily. "I don't want it to be an arrangement anymore," he said. "I don't know how to say that better than that. I want it to be a marriage. A real one." He paused. "But I need you to know what you're choosing. Because I'm not an easy man, Eliza, I know that. I go quiet when I should talk. I work when I should feel things. I'm going to make mistakes with this, because I've forgotten how to do it, and I can't promise I'll remember perfectly." He stopped, because he had run out of words, which was not a condition he was accustomed to. Eliza looked at him for a long moment. "Nathan," she said. "Yes." I moved 2,000 miles for chance to build something real with someone honest, she said. I didn't ask for perfect. I never asked for perfect. She held his gaze. I asked for honesty and respect. You've given me both of those. Every day since I got here. She paused. I'm not going anywhere. The rain came down. Nathan looked at her in the lantern light, wet and tired, and more certain than he had ever seen her, which was saying something, because he had never seen her uncertain. He reached out and took her hand. Not a reflex this time. A decision. She held on. They stood there for a moment, in the quiet of the aftermath storm, with the fence they had repaired together between them and the lantern light, making everything close and warm. And Nathan Walker felt something move in his chest that he had given up, believing he would ever feel again. Not happiness exactly, something more specific than that and more durable. The feeling of a man who has been very cold for a long time, coming in from the dark toward a fire that is actually genuinely warm. They went inside. They did not talk about it further that night, which was exactly right, because some things don't need to be discussed to be decided. They drank hot coffee in the kitchen while the rain finished its work outside, and Nathan said they'd need 2 men on the fence in the morning, and Eliza said she'd have Hector and Pete ready at first light, and that was what they talked about. But their hands were still close together on the kitchen table. Not quite touching, almost. The morning came with the particular clean brightness that follows a hard storm, the world scrubbed and still, the creek running high and purposeful. The grass in the eastern pasture catching the new light in the particular way that healthy grass does. Nathan stood at the kitchen window with his coffee and looked at the eastern pasture that had been brown and broken a month ago, and was now undeniably recovering. He heard Eliza come into the kitchen behind him, he said, without turning the eastern pasture. She came to stand beside him and look. The bureau credit, she said. If it comes through, we can get the second growth seed in before September. It'll take through winter, and by spring, it'll come back, he said. Yes, she said, it will. They stood together at the window, the coffee warm in their hands, the recovered pasture in front of them, and Nathan felt the morning, with all its practical requirements, the fence repairs, the cattle count, the credit application. Cole still somewhere in the county planning his next move, and he felt all of it without the crushing weight that had made every morning for 3 years feel like something to be survived rather than used. He had not noticed, precisely, when the mornings changed. But they had changed. Cole's next move came that afternoon, and it came in a form Nathan had not anticipated. A letter, hand-delivered by Denton, who left it at the gate without coming to the house. The envelope was addressed to Eliza. Nathan brought it inside and set it on the table. Eliza opened it. He watched her face as she read it. Watched the color change. Watched the stillness that came over her. Different from her usual stillness, which was the stillness of composure. This was the stillness of someone who has just been hit somewhere they did not expect. She set the letter on the table. He's found the man I was engaged to in St. Louis, she said. He's offered to pay his travel expenses if he comes to Millhaven to speak with anyone who might be interested in Eliza Harper's character before her marriage is formalized. She paused. The letter is to inform me of this as she looked at the word on the page as a courtesy. Nathan picked up the letter and read it himself. Cole had not signed it. It was written in a clerk's hand, clean and cold, and it said exactly what Eliza had summarized, no more and no less. The implication was plain. Whatever the former fiancé might say in Millhaven would be said with Cole's arrangement behind it, which meant it would be said with Cole's money giving it a platform. His name, Nathan said. Raymond Fitch, Eliza said. She looked at her hands on the table. He'll say whatever Cole tells him to say. Raymond is not a man with strong conviction about the truth. That's part of why I ended the engagement. Nathan set the letter down. He looked at Eliza. He looked at her carefully, at the set of her jaw, and the tightness around her eyes, and the particular way she was holding herself, which was the way of someone enduring something rather than managing it. He had seen her manage everything. He had not seen her like this. "How long does Denton give him to arrive?" Nathan said. "The letter says he could be here within the week." "Then we formalize the arrangement before he arrives," Nathan said. She looked up. "We make it legal," he said, "before Fitch gets here. Before Cole can put his man in front of anyone and have him speak to the question of your character before your marriage. Because if we're already married when he arrives, what he says is irrelevant. He's just a stranger with a grudge." He held her gaze. "If that's what you want." Eliza looked at him for a long moment. "Is that the only reason?" she said, quiet, direct. Because she was always direct, even about the things that cost something to ask. Nathan held her gaze. "No," he said. The word was plain and steady and entirely his own. Eliza held his gaze for another beat. Then she said, "All right." "All right," he said. She picked up her coffee. He picked up his. Outside, the creek ran high and fast and purposeful over the clean stones, and the eastern pasture held the morning light. And Nathan Walker sat at his kitchen table, with the woman who had arrived 6 weeks ago, with a battered suitcase, and the clearest eyes he had ever seen, and made the quiet decision that was also. He understood with the full weight of a man, finally paying attention, the most important one he had made in 3 years. He was not going to let Cole take this. He was not going to let fear take this. He had spent 3 years protecting himself from loss by refusing to have anything worth losing, and all it had given him was a ranch going to ruin and a life that felt like a house with all the windows shut. The windows were open now. He was not going to close them again. They were married on a Thursday. Not because Thursday was special. Because Thursday was the earliest the circuit judge could be in Millhaven, and Nathan Walker had decided that earliest was exactly what the situation required. He sent Pete to town with the message on Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, the judge had confirmed. By Tuesday, word had moved through Millhaven, the way word always moved through Millhaven, faster than the people carrying it could walk, and by Wednesday, Margaret Holloway had appeared at the ranch with a jar of preserved peaches, and the announcement that she intended to be present whether she was invited or not. "You're invited," Eliza told her. Margaret beamed and said she would bring the Donahues. Nathan observed this from the doorway, with the expression of a man watching a small, unstoppable river change course, and deciding it was not worth arguing with the water. Wednesday night he could not sleep. He lay in the dark and took honest inventory of himself, the kind of inventory a man does when he has made a decision that matters and wants to make sure he has made it, with his eyes open. He thought about what he was doing and why. He thought about Cole's letter and Raymond Fitch somewhere on a westbound stage with Cole's money in his pocket. He thought about the practical strategy of formalizing the marriage before Fitch arrived, which was real and valid, and had been part of the calculation. And then he set that aside and made himself think about what else was true. What was true was that he had spent 6 weeks watching a woman rebuild his life around him while he stood in the middle of it, telling himself it was practical. What was true was that he had held her hand in a rainy field at 4 in the morning and felt something unlock in his chest that had been sealed for 3 years. What was true was that he could not remember the last time he had walked into his own kitchen and felt the particular warmth of a place where someone was present and working and alive. And now that warmth was there every morning, and on the mornings he imagined it gone. Something in him refused the image entirely. He was not marrying Eliza Harper to outmaneuver Richard Cole. He was marrying her because she was the most honest person he had ever encountered, and honesty was the thing he valued above everything. And he had been a fool to spend 6 weeks pretending that was just a practical observation. He made himself acknowledge it plainly, in the dark, alone, without softening it. Then he went to sleep. The morning of the wedding was ordinary in all the ways that mattered. Nathan was up before 4. The horses needed water. The south fence repair from the storm needed a second look. He did both of those things with the focused tension of a man who has found that physical work is the best preparation for emotional occasions. And by the time the sun was properly up, He had settled into the particular calm that comes after a decision has been fully made and there is nothing left to do but move toward it. He was at the water trough when Eliza came out of the house. She was wearing the better of her two good dresses, the dark blue one that he had seen twice before, at the harvest meeting and at the post office, and her hair was done with unusual care, and she was carrying a small bunch of late summer wildflowers that she had clearly cut from the kitchen garden and had held loosely at her side, like she wasn't entirely certain about them. She stopped when she saw him. He was still in his work clothes. "I have time to change," he said. She looked at the flowers in her hand. "I wasn't sure about these." "They're good," he said. She looked up. "Are they?" "Yes," he said, simply. Because they were. She held on to them. Thomas arrived an hour before the judge, which meant he had driven in the dark to get there. He said nothing dramatic about this. He simply came in, shook Nathan's hand with both of his, and then turned to Eliza and held her hands for a moment and said, "Thank you for staying." Eliza said, "Thank you for the advertisement." Thomas laughed. The real laugh. The one Nathan had not heard from his father in a very long time, and the sound of it in the kitchen did something complicated to Nathan's throat. Margaret arrived with the Donahues and two other families. Frank Donahue shook Nathan's hand, the same way he had at the harvest meeting, without ceremony, the shake of a man who has been waiting for the right thing to happen and is satisfied to see it arrive. Martha Donahue hugged Eliza immediately and without preamble, and Eliza received it with the brief, startled expression of someone who has not been hugged without warning in a while, and then held on. Hector and Pete stood near the barn door with their good hats on. Pete kept straightening his. Hector told him to stop straightening it. They had this exchange 3 times. The judge arrived at 11. A compact man named Aldous Warren, who had been performing marriages and recording deeds across 4 counties for 20 years, and had the unhurried competence of someone for whom the serious things in life had long since stopped being overwhelming. He shook hands, assessed the gathering, and said he was ready when they were. Nathan stood beside Eliza in the yard, with the people who had come to watch, and Judge Warren said the words, and Nathan said the words he was supposed to say, and Eliza said the words she was supposed to say. And her voice was steady all the way through, the same steady clarity she brought to everything, not performed, not managed, just genuinely hers. When it was done, Thomas put his hand on Nathan's shoulder briefly and said nothing. "That was enough," Margaret cried. She did not apologize for it. Frank Donahue brought out a bottle of something he had been carrying in his coat pocket for this exact purpose. And there was a general sound from the small group of people assembled that was part laughter and part relief and part the particular emotion of people who have watched something hard become something good. Nathan looked at Eliza. She was accepting a hug from Margaret with the expression of someone who had started the day uncertain about wildflowers and had arrived somewhere considerably warmer than she had expected. She caught his eye over Margaret's shoulder. She smiled. Not the controlled, careful expression she wore when she was managing a difficult moment. A real one, unguarded and brief and entirely specifically hers. He held it for a second. Then Margaret released her and turned to Nathan and hugged him, which he endured with the private dignity of a man who has decided that this is an acceptable cost of the morning. And over Margaret's head he saw his father watching him with the expression of a man who has been patient for a very long time and is finally quietly glad. Raymond Fitch arrived in Millhaven 2 days later. Nathan knew he was coming before he arrived. Pete heard it at the feed store Thursday morning. Entrick, someone on the Wednesday stage who was asking directions to the Walker Ranch, and Pete had ridden back with the particular speed of someone delivering information they consider urgent. Nathan thanked him, finished the fence work he was on, and went inside to tell Eliza. She took it the way she took most things, without drama, with clear eyes. "Let him come," she said. "He'll go to Cole first," Nathan said. "Cole will point him at the people most likely to listen." "Let him," she said again. She looked at Nathan directly. "We're married, Nathan." Whatever Raymond Fitch says to anyone in this county, he's saying it about a married woman whose husband is standing right here. That changes what he can do with it. It doesn't change what he says. No, she agreed, but it changes how much it matters. She paused. And I'd like to talk to him myself. Nathan looked at her. Eliza, not to argue, she said, not to threaten him or plead with him. I just want to look at him, and let him look at me, and let him make whatever decision he's going to make with full knowledge of what he's doing. And to whom? Her voice was steady. He was a coward when I knew him. Cowards sometimes remember themselves when they're made to look directly at something. Nathan thought about this for a moment. And if he doesn't remember himself? Then we deal with what he says, she said. The same way we've dealt with everything else. Fitch came to the ranch the following afternoon. He was perhaps 35, the kind of man who had been handsome enough at 25 to get away with things that had calcified into habits by 35. He rode up to the gate with the careful posture of someone who has been told he is in a powerful position and is working to inhabit it. And he waited at the gate until Nathan came out. Mr. Walker, he said. Fitch, Nathan said. He did not add anything to it. Fitch looked past him to the house. I was hoping to speak with Eliza. My wife, Nathan said, is inside. If you have something to say to her, you can come in and say it in front of me. Something moved through Fitch's expression. He had not, Nathan judged, expected the word wife. Cole had perhaps not yet passed that information along, or had passed it along in a way that Fitch had not fully weighted. The word landed on him now with visible effect. I wasn't aware, he started. 3 days ago, Nathan said. You're welcome to come in. Fitch came in. Eliza was at the kitchen table when they came through the door. She looked up when Fitch entered and held his gaze with an evenness that Nathan recognized as costing her something, though she did not let that cost show. Raymond, she said. He stopped inside the door. He looked at her. He looked at Nathan. He looked at the kitchen, the organized, working, lived-in kitchen of a household that was clearly functioning, clearly real, clearly not the temporary or desperate situation Cole had presumably described to him. Eliza, he said. Voice was less certain than it had been in the yard. I imagine, Eliza said, that you've been told certain things about me. About why I left St. Louis, and what my circumstances were, and what I was looking for when I came west. She kept her voice even. Some of what you've been told is probably close to true. Some of it isn't. But I'm not going to argue with you about the version of events Richard Cole paid you to carry, because I don't think you came here entirely because of Cole. Fitch said nothing. I think, Eliza said, that some part of you wanted to see for yourself. Whether I was all right, whether what happened between us, had she stopped. Chose her words. Whether I had landed somewhere that was worth what it cost to get here. The kitchen was very quiet. Fitch looked at the table. At his hands, at the window. You look well, he said. It was a small thing, but it was honest. I am well, she said. I'm better than I have been in a long time. He looked at Nathan then. Took the full measure of him, the way men sometimes do, not aggressively, just honestly, as a man checking a situation with his own eyes. Nathan met it without performance. Fitch looked back at Eliza. I told Cole I'd speak to people, he said. I signed nothing. I promised nothing in writing. I know, Eliza said. That's why you're here instead of at the boarding house. With his money telling his story. Something happened in Fitch's face, not collapse exactly. More the expression of a man who has been caught in the act of almost doing something he would not have been able to live cleanly with, and is being given the exact narrow margin of opportunity to not do it. He stood up. I have a stage to catch tomorrow, he said. He looked at Eliza once more. I'm glad you're well, he said. And this time, it was entirely without calculation. He left. Nathan stood at the window and watched him ride back toward town. He stood there for a while, after the sound of hoofbeats faded. He won't talk, Eliza said from the table. No, Nathan agreed. He won't. Cole will be furious. Yes, Nathan said. A pause. Good, Eliza said. Nathan turned from the window and looked at her. There was something in her face, not triumph. Exactly, but the clean relief of a woman who has been carrying a weight at a careful distance and has finally been able to set it down properly. He recognized the expression because he knew what carrying things at careful distances looked like from the inside. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. They did not talk about Fitch, or coal, or water rights, or any of the practical architecture of the fight they were in. They sat at the kitchen table in the afternoon quiet, and Nathan poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one across to Eliza. And they drank it, while the ranch made its ordinary sounds around them. And it was one of the best hours Nathan Walker could remember in 3 years. Not because anything dramatic happened in it. Because nothing dramatic happened in it. Cole's response came within the week, not a letter this time. Not Denton with implications. Cole himself came to the county commission meeting, not the community meeting, the actual county commission, and filed a formal complaint about the Walker water usage, citing a newly discovered survey discrepancy that contradicted the Helena confirmation. The complaint was technically legal. It required a response within 30 days. It would cost money to respond properly, and time that the ranch didn't have going into the harvest season. Nathan heard about it from Frank Donahue, who came to the ranch on a Tuesday with the news and the of a man who has been expecting something and is not happy to be right. He found a surveyor willing to say what he needs, said Frank told him. Man from over the Wyoming line, nobody knows his work. His work will fall apart if it goes to county hearing, Nathan said. That's 6 weeks minimum, Frank said. Harvest is in 4. He knows that. Yes, Nathan said. He knows that. Frank looked at him steadily. What do you need? Nathan thought about it. The other creek ranchers, he said. If they file a joint response not supporting my specific claim, just questioning the legitimacy of a survey from a Wyoming man, with no county record, slows his complaint down, and puts the commission in a position where they have to investigate his surveyor before they can act on the complaint. Frank was quiet for a moment, working through the logic. That buys you past harvest, he said. Yes. And past harvest the crop income covers the legal response. Yes, Frank nodded slowly. I'll make the calls today. He stood. Picked up his hat. Nathan, how many years have you been sitting out here alone, fighting this man? 3, Nathan said. Right, Frank said. So you understand that you should have let us help 3 years ago. Yes, Nathan said, I understand that. Frank left. Nathan went inside and found Eliza at the table. She was always at the table, or in the garden, or at the fence, or somewhere practical. And the predictability of this had become one of the things he relied on, without quite knowing it, and told her what Frank had said. She listened, nodded, said the bureau credit application. Did it come through? He had checked the mail that morning. Yes, he said. For the first time in the conversation, she looked something approaching relieved. Then the seed order can go in this week. If the weather holds, the eastern pasture gets its second planting before the first frost. She paused. Cole can slow the legal process. He can't slow the grass. Nathan looked at her. No, he said, he can't. The harvest season arrived, the way it always did, too much to do, and not enough hours in the day to do it, and Nathan Walker worked through it with a completeness of effort he had not brought to any harvest in 3 years. He was up before 4 and sometimes not in until after dark, and Eliza matched him hour for hour without being asked. Not overnight, not all at once, and somewhere in the middle of the second week of harvest, Nathan realized that he could not precisely remember what the mornings had been like before she was in them. That thought came to him one morning while he was at the water trough. And she was in the kitchen, and the light from the kitchen window fell across the yard in the way that kitchen light does in the early morning, warm and specific, like a small reliable proof that someone is inside. He stood there for a moment, longer than the water trough required, looking at that light. 3 years ago, that window had gone dark. He had not understood until right now how completely dark. The harvest came in well, better than well. Better than any harvest Nathan had managed in 3 years. Partly because of the soil work Eliza had pushed through on the eastern pasture, partly because of the Billings auction she had identified as the right market for the sell-off stock, and partly because Nathan Walker had spent this season working like a man who had something to work toward, rather than a man simply going through the motions of a life he was no longer particularly invested in. The Billings auction alone covered the legal response costs with money left over. When Nathan came home from Billings and told Eliza the numbers, she sat very still for a moment. Then she took out the accounts ledger and wrote the numbers in, and held the book up so he could see the column. For the first time in 2 years, the Walker operation was not running at a loss. Nathan looked at the number for a long moment. Then he looked at her. "You did this," he said. "We did this," she said. Straightforward, no drama. Just accurate. He sat down across from her. He looked at the ledger. The Eastern Pasture account. The water rights documentation. The supply cost reduction. The Billings auction figures. The Bureau credit line. Every item was in her handwriting, or had been initiated by her thinking. She had been built, weeks, when he was still standing at a distance, telling himself the arrangement was temporary. "I made it very difficult for you," he said. "Yes," she said. "You did, I'm sorry for that." She set the ledger down. Met his eyes directly. "You were grieving," she said. "People in grief are not always easy. That doesn't make them not worth the effort." He held her gaze. "I spent 3 years being not worth the effort," he said. "And you showed up anyway." "I showed up for the ranch," she said. "And then I stayed for you." She paused. "Those are different things, and I want you to know the difference." Nathan felt the words settle into him deep, the way the honest things always settled, not quickly but permanently. "I know the difference," he said. She smiled. Not the small, careful smile she sometimes gave him when she was pleased about something practical. This one was different. This one reached her eyes and stayed there. The county commission hearing on Cole's survey complaint was held on a Wednesday in late October, and it lasted 3 hours. And at the end of it, the commission voted to dismiss the complaint pending verification of the Wyoming surveyor's credentials, which, as the Three Creek System ranchers had jointly argued in their response, had not been properly established at the time of filing. Cole's complaint was not dead, but it was delayed past any season in which it could do real damage. And everyone in Millhaven County who had been watching the fight understood what the delay meant. Nathan left the hearing with Frank Donahue and 2 of the other ranchers, and they stood outside in the October cold and talked about the spring planting and the creek levels and the road condition on the North County route. And Nathan Walker participated in the conversation of a man who belongs to a community naturally, without effort, as if he had not spent 3 years on the outside of exactly this kind of ordinary exchange. Frank said, "At the end, good fight." Nathan said, "Good allies." Frank nodded. "That's the same thing." Nathan rode home. Eliza was in the kitchen when he came in. She looked up from what she was doing, and he saw the question in her face before he said anything. And he said, "Dismissed," and she exhaled slowly and said, "Good," and he sat down at the table, and she poured coffee without asking, and they sat together in the kitchen while the fire did its work in the cold afternoon. And it was one of the best things Nathan Walker had felt in 3 years, not the winning of the hearing, but coming home to tell her, and having her there to tell. He understood, sitting there, why his father had said what he said. Loving someone and losing them doesn't prove that love is dangerous. It proves that it was real. He had been treating the proof of love's reality as evidence that love was a risk he could not afford. He had been wrong about that. He had been spectacularly, costly wrong about it. And the wrongness had cost him 3 years, and very nearly cost him the ranch, and had definitely the kind of life he might have been building during all that time he spent shutting the windows against the cold. He looked at Eliza across the kitchen table. She was making a note in the margin of the accounts ledger with the same complete absorption she brought to all practical things, her hair doing what it wanted at the end of a long day, her pen moving with the confidence of a woman who knows what she is doing. and has stopped needing to prove it to anyone. Eliza, he said. She looked up. I love you, he said. He said it the way he said everything he meant, directly, without decoration, without the performance of someone making a statement for effect. He said it because it was true, and because it was the most important true thing in his current inventory, and because he had understood, somewhere between the fence line and the kitchen table and the letter from Helena and the rain at 4 in the morning, that the cost of not saying it was higher than any other cost he was currently managing. She looked at him. Her pen was still in her hand. I know, she said. He almost smiled. That's all you're going to say? No, she said. She set the pen down. I love you too. I've loved you for longer than was strictly convenient, to be honest. She held his gaze with complete steadiness. But I wanted to wait until you got there yourself. I wasn't going to say it first, and then have you feel like you owed me something. That's very like you, he said. Yes, she agreed. It is. He reached across the table. She took his hand. They sat there for a while, the two of them in the kitchen, that had once been the emptiest room in Nathan Walker's life, with the fire and the coffee and the accounts ledger open to a page that finally showed numbers that meant something, and outside the eastern pasture going quietly into its winter rest with the new growth grass underneath the frost, waiting for spring. Winter came to the Montana Valley, the way it always came, without apology, completely taking possession of the land with the authority of something that has always known it belonged there. Nathan Walker worked through it with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this for most of his life, and the particular energy of a man who was doing it for someone, and the distinction between those two things was, he found, more significant than he could have previously articulated. He fixed things he had been letting go for years, not all at once. Gradually, in the order of their importance, the way Eliza had first taught him to think about the ledgers, not overwhelming, just methodical, one thing at a time until the list was shorter than it had been the week before. The hinge on the root cellar door, which Eliza had fixed herself in the first week, got a proper replacement with new hardware. The fence along the north property line, which had been losing its argument with the weather for 2 seasons, got rebuilt section by section through November. The letters that had piled up near the door for 2 years had already been answered. But Nathan went through the correspondence from the Agricultural Bureau more carefully and found 3 additional programs Eliza had missed. She had missed them, he noted, because they were in the October circulars that had arrived after she did, which meant she had found everything she could find with the information available at the time, and the programs she'd missed were genuinely new. He brought them to her over supper, and she read through them with her pen already in hand. This one, she said immediately, pointing. The winter cattle development credit, he said. It covers the cost of the new breeding stock we need. If we apply before February, I'll write the letter tomorrow, he said. I'll write it, she said. Your letters to the Bureau are too short. My letters get to the point. The Bureau likes preamble, she said. They're government. They need to feel that you understand the importance of what you're asking for before they'll give it to you. He handed her the circular. She was already writing the outline on the back. He watched her for a moment. You could have done all of this without me, he said. She looked up. Done what? The ranch, the water rights, the credit programs. You could have figured all of it out and run the operation yourself. She looked at him steadily. Probably, she said, but that's not what I came for. What did you come for? I told you, she said, in the letter. I came for a fair arrangement with an honest person. She paused. I got more than that. He held her gaze. So did I, he said. The snow came. The creek froze along its slower edges. The cattle moved in their winter patterns, reliable and necessary. And Nathan moved with them, and through them, and came home, at the end of each day, to the house that was warm, and the kitchen that was lit, and the woman who had rebuilt this life alongside him from the ground up. He thought about Cole sometimes. Cole had gone quiet since the hearing, not retired, not finished, but recalculated. A man like Cole did not stop. He simply found new terrain. Nathan knew there would be another move eventually, another survey or commission maneuver, or carefully placed piece of information. He was not afraid of it. Not because he thought Cole couldn't cause damage, but because he had stopped facing it, alone, and alone had been the condition that made him vulnerable. He thought about Clara, too. Regularly, honestly, without the tearing quality that had characterized 3 years of grief. He thought about her laugh and her handwriting in the oak chest, and the photograph that looked nothing like her except in the eyes. He thought about what his father had said and believed now, with the full weight of a man who had tested the idea against experience, that it was true. Loving someone and losing them proved the love was real. It did not prove anything else. It did not prove that the next thing would be taken too, or that wanting something made it dangerous, or that closing the windows against the cold was a survivable, long-term strategy. He had survived it, he did not recommend it. In the spring, the eastern pasture came back. Not fully, not the way it would be in another 2 seasons, when the root systems would be fully established and the drainage would be working, as Eliza's rotation plan intended, but visibly, undeniably, in the specific green of healthy grass catching early April light. Nathan stood at the fence, on the morning it became impossible to deny, with his coffee in his hand and the cold still in the air, and looked at it for a long time. He heard Eliza come up beside him. She didn't say anything. Just stood there with her own coffee and looked at the pasture. After a while he said, "Next season it'll be fully productive." "Yes," she said, "the breeding stock, if the credit comes through." "The credit came through," she said. "I got the confirmation yesterday." "I forgot to tell you." He looked at her. She had the expression of someone who realizes she has delivered important information casually and is not quite apologizing for it. "There was a lot happening yesterday," she said. "There's always a lot happening." "Yes," she said, "that's how I know we're doing it right." He looked back at the pasture. The green of it was very clear in the early light. He thought about the morning he had come home to a woman, standing at the fence rail, running her hand along the wood, with an assessing eye, asking how long it had been since someone helped him take care of this place. He thought about the answer he had given her a while, and the answer he had not given her, which was the real one. He had the real answer now, and it no longer required saying because she already knew it, had known it since before he did. He reached over and took her hand. She held on, the way she always held on, without excess, without drama, steadily, and without any intention of letting go. The eastern pasture was green. The ranch was running at a profit. The creek was theirs, and the fences were solid, and the ledger showed numbers that meant something. In the oak chest in the study, a photograph sat in its folder with Clara's careful handwriting on the label, and it sat there honored and remembered. And exactly where it belonged, part of the story, not the end of it. Nathan Walker had spent 3 years believing that his story was finished. He had been wrong about that. He had been wrong, and the wrongness had been corrected by a woman who arrived with a battered suitcase and the clearest eyes he had ever seen, and the patience to stand at a broken fence and wait for the man behind it to remember what he was worth. He had not made it easy. She had not required easy. She had required honesty and respect, and a man willing to show up when it counted for the ranch, for the fight, for the early morning and the late night and everything in between. He had given her all of that. She had given him back his life. And standing there in the April light, with her hand in his, and the green pasture ahead of them, and the whole long working season just beginning, Nathan Walker understood with the complete and final clarity of a man who has been lost and is no longer lost, that love is not the thing that breaks you when it ends. Love is the thing that proves beyond any argument that you were fully alive while you had it. And the man who had once turned away from everything worth, having turned toward the morning, and held on and did not let go.